Okay, I'm Dr. Ros Haslina. I am the CEO of Act for Health, and I'm so happy to see the numbers of our participants tonight because it is at 9 p.m. I understand it's time for all of us to rest, but I am happy to see that this shows that you are excited to know about this topic that we have for you tonight. So as all of you know, all over here are actually our digital phenotyping research participant that we are testing out our smartphone apps in your phone that we want to use to detect for early detection of Alzheimer's disease, or you also know it as a dementia or any memory problem. And again, thank you so much for staying tonight. I hope that we have a very interesting session. And please, when we have the Q&A session later, you can feel free to ask questions. But before we begin, let me share some housekeeping rules. I understand that all of you now muted because this is to make sure that this process is smooth. And this turning on your camera, switch on your camera is optional. And I see a few of your faces here. Thank you so much. Please keep on switch on your camera so that we can see how is your facial response, whether it's excited, happy, or just like wondering. And also there is a raise button option there. If you have any issues or if you just need our attention, then me together with me tonight is Miss Fazlin, our research assistant. I know maybe some of you know her very well. And tonight also is Miss Obitra, our RA also. Yeah, so helping out if you have any issues. And there is an options of chat box there where you can click and type in your question if you feel shy to ask live in this webinar. All right. So without further ado, let me introduce you. So this is some of the itinerary. Just now I said housekeeping, and then there is sharing, and there will be a Q&A, group photo, and the closing remarks. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker for tonight. It is Associate Professor Dr. Cheryl Devine. She is a clinical neuropsychologist from Boston University School of Public Health. So she is the main person for us to liaise with in this research, wherever that we have any issues or what we can try to refer to her. And she is our director of training for global cohort development of Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, a consultant at Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation Diagnostic Accelerator. She was a research assistant professor of anatomy and neurobiology. She also a multiple principal investigator in a lot of research projects. And one of it here is expanding the pipeline to graduate research in Alzheimer's disease. She is also research instructor and trainer in the Framingham Heart Study. This is a very famous study. If you Google on this Framingham Heart Study, you will know it's a very big cohort compared to our Malaysian cohort. She holds a PhD in clinical psychology from Bowling Green State University. So without waiting for more, hi, I saw Dr. Cheryl now is live. So I pass the screen to you, Dr. Cheryl, if you are ready.
Okay, let me just find a move. Let's see. Okay, is everybody able to see the slide that I'm starting with?
Yes.
Wonderful. Love it when it works the first time. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you today about the tasks that we've been asking you to do on the smartphone, which we refer to as digital testing. So again, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, and as a clinical neuropsychologist, I'm interested in cognition or memory, problem solving, those sorts of things. I've been with the Framingham Heart Study and BU, Boston University, for about 25 years now. And my main focus in my research is on risk factors for cognitive decline and dementia, as well as protective factors to maintain a healthy brain. So let me just say a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So the reason that I'm talking with you is because we do have at the Framingham Heart Study and Boston University, we have this great collaboration with the research project that you're involved with, Ageless. And so we've just begun doing some really exciting work, and I'm really excited to be able to tell you about it. Here are the things that I plan to talk about during the time we have together. And please feel free to ask me questions. So to start off with, we're going to talk about why we're doing this research, why it's meaningful, and then the smartphone tasks that you're doing. So how do you do them, just in case there's any confusion about that, as well as what do they mean and why we're asking you to do them. Talk a little bit about why your participation is so critical to the work that we're doing. And then I'll go over a little bit of research that we have to date. So that's the plan. So as you all know, I'm sure people age very differently. Some people live into their 90s or 100s, remain cognitively intact. They're able to remember, to reason, to problem solve, communicate just as they always had. Unfortunately, that's not true for all of us. Some of us develop these diseases of the brain that cause brain cells to die, which leads to cognitive impairment, which will get will get worse over time, to the point where folks need to help with everything that they do in their daily life. So our goal is to discover why these differences exist. What are the risk factors that make some people more likely to develop these diseases? And importantly, what are the factors that protect our brains, that help people to age without losing that kind of cognitive abilities? So the current state of Alzheimer's disease in the world is alarming and only expected to get worse over time. So currently there are more than 55 million people with Alzheimer's in the world, and that's expected to grow to 139 million by 2050 if we don't find effective interventions. So I will note that the majority of people with Alzheimer's live in low and middle income countries. Currently, that's about 60% of all people in the world with Alzheimer's disease, and that's expected to grow to 71%. So that divide is expected to get even worse as time passes. So as troubling as these statistics are, even more alarming is the estimate that 75% of people living with dementia in the world today are not diagnosed, which, given the dramatic impact of this disease on a person's functioning, the implications of being undiagnosed and therefore misunderstood can be devastating for individuals, families, and communities. So why is your contribution important? There are several reasons why your participation in this research is so important, and why we believe that completing these smartphone tasks is potentially groundbreaking in our discovery. So first of all, a review of 30 years worth of studies on Alzheimer's disease, that's from 1988 to 2017, revealed that almost all the research on Alzheimer's done in the world is done in North America, Western Europe, and Australia. There's some substantial amount that's being done in China and Japan, but about 13%. But other than those other places I just mentioned, only 17% of the research is done in the rest of the world, which obviously is a huge problem because we don't understand Alzheimer's disease, and without being able to learn about people everywhere, we're really being hampered in our ability to develop interventions for it. So as you'll know, this little, I don't know if you'll notice the little box in the top that shows the other places that research is being done. Malaysia's not there. And that's because there's not a lot of research being done in Malaysia right now. The research that you're involved with is really the biggest and most in-depth research that's being done in Malaysia, and really critical to our understanding of Alzheimer's as we move forward. So why is your contribution so important? That's one of the reasons. What I just described is that we really need people, not just in Malaysia, but all over the world, to be able to participate in research so we can better understand these diseases and protective factors for keeping our brains healthy. So in Malaysia, your study that you're in is actually pretty unique and certainly very special. So another reason that we believe we have not discovered ways to prevent or cure Alzheimer's is because the disease itself starts decades, 10, 20, 30 years before we're actually seeing any kind of symptoms develop in a person. And that's very important, because what's happening when we're trying to identify possible solutions or interventions, for example, developing medications for this disease, by the time we're identifying folks and bringing them into the research, they've already had changes in their brain for such a long time that we think it's too late to really have effective interventions, because we've spent, decades and billions of dollars researching Alzheimer's, and we still don't know how to treat it. So our belief is that if we can identify who's at risk for Alzheimer's disease much earlier in the disease process, well before we can actually see any kind of symptoms, that might be able to help us to find these ways of preventing, reversing, or treating Alzheimer's disease. Excuse me. Okay, so I'll summarize this graph. You don't need to look too closely at it. I'll let you know what it all means. So the bottom graph, the line that goes across the bottom that says clinical disease stage, that is showing the progression that somebody might go through from normal cognition through this stage of what we call preclinical. So we know that some of the disease processes started, but none of the symptoms have emerged, through what we call mild cognitive impairment, which is when someone just starts having trouble doing their daily tasks. So it's a lot harder to do your finances. It's a lot harder to keep track of your appointments or your medications or things like that, through to the stage of dementia, where you're really very reliant on other people for your daily activities. So the first three lines here, the red, orange, and green, they're showing us at what point in the stage can we use those strategies to identify the disease. And those first three lines are things that require either advanced radiological studies like a PET scan, or extracting cerebral spinal fluid, which is the fluid that goes from your spine to your brain and keeps everything working well. Also shows some indicators of this disease, so that requires what's called a spinal tap, which is not a pleasant experience to have. So those strategies, though, will help us identify this disease much earlier in the process. You can see how quickly that line goes high, because that's saying that they are identifying the disease. After those first three is MRI scans, which I know a lot of you have had or may have in the future, which is pictures of the brain structure. And then that last one, the very last way that we can identify if somebody has Alzheimer's disease or dementia, is by cognitive testing. And as a neuropsychologist, this is what I do. And so we believe that what we need to do is move that line where cognition is a way of identifying a disease way earlier. We need to move it all the way to the left so that we can tell who's at risk well before they actually start showing the signs. So that's what we're trying to do, is to develop cognitive tools that are much more sensitive and can tell much earlier in a person's life whether they are at risk for one of these brain diseases. So again, early detection is critical. So because we've had, as I said earlier, we've had so many decades and so many billions of dollars that have gone into research on Alzheimer's disease, and we really only have a couple of medications that have been developed that maybe it's controversial, but maybe will help people with their symptoms, but they do not delay Alzheimer's disease progression. They don't stop it, they don't treat it, they don't prevent it. We're far from those things, and we need to figure those things out. So digital technology or smartphones, that's what we think is where we're going with being able to do this earlier detection. And using these tools really helps us with a lot of the barriers that are seen in traditional ways of assessing people's cognition. So because almost everybody has a smartphone, we can deploy it very easily all over the world. A lot of places in the world don't have people with the expertise to be able to give all those expensive tests that currently diagnose dementia, or and like I said, there are a lot of places in the world that can't do that, not just because they don't have the expertise, but they also don't have the funding to be able to support those very expensive kinds of tasks. It's also non-invasive, so we don't have to take blood or cerebral spinal fluid. You just are using your smartphone. So that's going to be able to access more people. Similarly, more affordable than other tasks, than other assessment tools that are used now. Easy to upgrade as we develop more and get better and better applications. We can do that quickly, and this is very adaptable. So it has the potential, using a smartphone to do these kinds of tasks has the potential to be able to give very individualized feedback to users. And I mentioned that it has the potential to do that because currently we're not giving feedback to participants about their performance on these tests because we really don't know what they mean. However, we are in discussions about how we can do that. And so that will be coming. But currently that would be why, if you're not getting any kind of feedback on these tasks now, it's really because we don't know yet what they mean. But yeah, well, it's coming. The other thing is, as you're contributing all of this data, when you do these smartphone tasks and we collect all this data from you, this data will stick around potentially forever, indefinitely, certainly. And so as we learn more and more tools for analyzing the data, which more and more is using very advanced computer programming and analytics that are beyond my understanding, as we develop those strategies and tools, we can use the same data that we're collecting from your participation to try to learn about these kinds of diseases, as well as the ways of protecting our brain. So it's a resource that lasts, again, potentially forever, that we can continue to benefit our knowledge of an ability to treat and prevent these disorders. So those are some of the reasons we think the smartphone is really important. It's global impact, affordable, adaptable, and innovative. We're at the, as I said earlier, we're at the very beginning stages of this, but we have a lot of hope that this is really going to be helping us discover these things. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the smartphone application itself that you are using. Thank you very much for that, by the way. As you know, this is called Linus Participant. You probably had to go to the Play Store to download the application. And Linus Participant has a series of different tasks that we ask you to do. And some of those tasks, the ones that are kind of the reaction time, like how fast can you hit a button on the screen, those are part of a collection of tasks called DANA, which I'll talk to you about in just a second, just to give a tiny bit of history on that. So that's those tests. Brain games, thinking tasks, have to hit the button really fast. We're also asking you to speak. So we show you a picture, ask you to tell us everything you see in that picture, answer some questions, name animals. So we're getting a lot of speech data, and I'll talk more about that as we move along as well, because we think that's especially going to be very sensitive and easily deployed. We're also asking you to do walking and balancing tasks. Then we'll get to that in a little bit, as well as questionnaires. Okay. So I said I'd mention Dana, what that is. You don't have to worry too much about what's on this slide. Essentially, these tasks were developed by the US military because they needed quick, easy, efficient, accurate, and objective ways of measuring cognition and cognitive changes in their soldiers. Because there's a lot of things that happen in the military that affect the brain. So direct injuries, head injuries, exposures to blasts, and so on, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so on. So the military has done quite a bit of research on this, actually, in these fields that are mentioned here, but not on kind of the aging brain. So that's the place that we're moving into here. So I'm going to go through the tasks that we're asking you to do real quickly, just to let you know, again, how they're done in case you're confused about that at all, and what they mean. And so unfortunately, these were supposed to be little videos, but that's okay. I think I can describe it sufficiently for you. So the first task we ask you to do is called simple reaction time. So you see that bullseye comes out on the screen periodically, randomly, and every time you see it, you have to tap the screen as fast as you can. So this is measuring simple reaction time. So why is this important? This is important because being able to have quick reaction time has implications in your daily life. So these are just some examples that demonstrate what kind of thing that is, that simple reaction time. So a runner starts a race when they hear the signal, you catch something as it's starting to fall, answering a phone call when it rings, avoiding obstacles in your path, hitting your brakes when you see the brake lights in the car in front of you, avoiding something that's coming flying at your head, and so on. There are a lot of things in daily life that this is an important skill for. The next task that we ask you to do is called spatial processing. And in this task, you see two pictures. And so what you need to do is you need to look at the first picture and in your mind, rotate it, turn it to the side, and then identify whether or not it's the same. And if it's the same, as quickly as you can, you hit the same button. If it's not the same, as quickly as you can, you hit the different button. And so these are two examples here. The top example, they're the same. If you rotated them, they'd look identical. And the bottom example, they're not the same. So if you rotated it, would not look like the original one. Okay, and so why are we asking you to do these tasks? Well, understanding where you are in space and how objects interact with each other or relate to each other in space has a lot of implications in your daily life as well. So finding your way around in a city, reading a map, playing sports, doing jigsaw puzzles, packing a suitcase, assembling furniture, rearranging the furniture in your room, changing lanes while you're driving, sewing, knitting, dancing. There are lots of things that rely on this skill. And so that's an important one that we are trying to assess. The next test that we ask you to do is called code substitution. So in this case, you have a code at the top, which is a number matched with a certain mark. So each of those 9 numbers has its own special mark. And then on the screen, what flashes is a pair, a single pair, and you have to identify whether that number and that mark go together in the key that's at the top. And you have to make this decision as quickly as you can and then respond, yes, it's in the code, no, it's not in the code. And so again, I have 2 examples here. The first one should be a no answer because the 9 does not have that symbol in the code. Whereas the next one, it would be a yes answer because that is the same code that goes with the 6 that you see in the key up above. Okay, sorry. So why are we asking you to do this task? Code substitution is something that we have a very similar test in the traditional kind of paper and pencil cognitive or neuropsychological tests that we give. And we've discovered in those tests that a lot of different cognitive skills need to be drawn upon to be able to successfully do this kind of test. And so here are some of the cognitive skills that are required. So you need to be able to pay attention to detail, filling out forms, driving, following a recipe, managing finances, those sorts of things. You need to have sufficient working memory. So this is keeping information in your mind to be able to use it and act on it. So recalling directions somebody just gave you, or managing your time, or remembering a phone number you just heard, or somebody's name, or translating from one language to another. Those sorts of things require working memory. Also, executive skills are required, and executive refers to a lot of different skills that kind of manage how we do and think about things. But for example, planning and organization are called upon with this task. So can you manage your schedules? How are you doing with budgeting? Can you follow directions? Can you plan a meal, plan your shopping list, break down projects into individual steps, those sorts of things. You also need to have adequate visual perception. So that's being able to understand what you see in order to work with it or do something with it. So reading, for example, writing, recognizing faces, working your way through a crowd, kicking a ball because you need to see where the ball is in relation to your body, doing art, identifying a plant versus a weed when you're gardening, those sorts of things. And then processing speed. And this is how quickly you can think and do. So driving, responding to emergencies, keeping up with a conversation that's going really fast, typing when somebody's telling you what to type quickly, following the action in a movie when that's happening very fast. So these are things that you need to keep up with. And so processing speed is important. The next task that we ask you to do is called Go, No Go. And this is perhaps the most confusing one for people to understand. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this in a little bit more detail. So what'll happen here is you see this building, right? And there are 6 windows, and periodically, randomly, an alien will show up in one of the windows. And so there are 2 types of aliens. There's the gray alien that you see here, and then there's the green alien that will also periodically show up. And what you are to do with this task is every time you see that gray alien, you're going to hit the blast button at the bottom of the screen as fast as you can. Every time you see the gray alien, hit the blast button as fast as you can. However, if it's a green alien that shows up, you do not want to hit the blast button. You do nothing. Green alien shows up, do nothing. Gray alien shows up, hit the blast button as fast as you can. So why are we doing this task? This is measuring impulsivity, or managing kind of the automatic things that you might want to do, stopping yourself from doing things when you're really not supposed to be doing them. So in that task, you need to stop yourself from hitting the blast button when the green alien comes up, even though you are already in the rhythm of hitting it for the gray alien. So this comes out in daily life: trouble waiting your turn, interrupting others, doing risky things, following traffic rules when you're late and want to get somewhere fast, saving money instead of spending it, staying calm with children even when you're angry. Those sorts of things are behaviors that you need to be able to control. The next task is procedural reaction time, where in this case you see at the bottom is a 2 or 3 button and a 4 or 5 button. So randomly a number is going to pop up on the screen, and if it's a 2 or 3, you're going to hit the button on the left. If it's 4 or 5, you hit the button on the right, again, as fast as you can. And so this is measuring procedural reaction time. So this is when something happens and you have to think about what should be my response to what just happened, and then you do that behavior. So here are some of the examples that that demonstrate procedural reaction. Also something like when you're trying to get into your email and you have to put in a password or passcode because you're blocked from something, hitting the brakes when you're driving, playing a musical instrument when you observe notes on sheet music, and those sorts of things. I apologize, I'm trying to go through things a little bit quickly for the sake of time. And then we're asking you to do all these speech tasks as mentioned. So there's category naming, say as many animals as you can in a minute, and then questions that we ask that are just about daily life. And this is to get samples of your speech that we can then analyze. So why animals? Why are we asking you to tell us as many animals as you can? This is helping to understand this categorization, which is, again, a really important cognitive skill that we deploy in our daily life. So grocery shopping, you go to the dairy section or the meat section. Sorting laundry, you put the shirts with the pants and the socks with the and so on. You know, ordering off a menu, you look at the appetizer, the main course, drinks, desserts, and so on. So there are a lot of things that we do in daily life that require this categorization. Responding to questions, this is an opportunity to get very natural language from participants who are answering these questions. So we can assess those sorts of things, much more natural than the forcing you into saying animals. Picture description, also, it's somewhat confined, but it also has a lot more of the kind of freedom to speak as you would like to. So we're asking you to look at a picture and describe everything that's happening in the picture. So again, we're getting lots of good speech data from this, as well as learning about language, syntax, so grammar, punctuation, and semantics, which is the meaning of the words that you're saying, as well as analyzing the actual speech itself, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and learning and memory, because we're asking you later to recall what was that picture and tell us about the picture again. So speech. I want to talk about speech because this is something that we think is really exciting, and we think we're going to identify features of speech very early, again, early in the disease process in order to identify people who are at risk. So this is an exciting study that we did quite a little while ago, a few years back. This is an individual person who did cognitive testing. So that's about an hour worth of doing different kinds of memory and attention and so on tasks. So in 2009, this participant had no cognitive impairment, and this is what it looks like when we pick up their speech on these sensors that are able to demonstrate what the sound waves look like. In 2015, this person had developed some cognitive impairment. So mild cognitive impairment, meaning they're having some trouble doing the more complex things in life. And as you see, the sound waves that are picked up are very different. And this was very exciting for us to find, because this is the kind of thing that we're looking for. What are these patterns in the speech or different features of the speech that might tell us who's at risk for later developing one of these cognitive disorders? And then we also ask you to do the clock drawing test, which gives us a lot of information about lots of different cognitive skills, kind of like that key that you're matching earlier that I said really draws on lots and lots of different cognitive abilities to be able to do successfully. So, and then we're asking you to do balance tests. So you recognize this. We're asking you to stand with the phone in your pocket for a while, and then we're asking you to also stand while doing a cognitive task that is splitting the brain work between keeping yourself standing upright and doing something that requires a distraction or a different kind of cognition. And so balance is important because for a couple reasons. One of those is because it can give us information about how much harder is it for you to stand still without kind of wobbling a little bit when you're distracted. versus when you're not. As well as balance is a problem with people as they develop cognitive impairment. Falls are very common. And so being able to identify early what are some of those signs that might show that there are going to be potentially balance problems in the future can be meaningful. And the same is, and it's assessing, your postural stability and being able to do two things at once. And this is very similar for walk. So again, we're measuring you walking just while you're paying attention to walking versus while you're trying to do something else. And that, I think, too, is giving us information about future, hopefully giving information about your potential future risk. Okay, so questionnaires, we're asking you about different things in our questionnaires. So for example, sleep. And sleep is both, having trouble sleeping is both something that might put you at risk for developing cognitive problems, as well as a problem that can occur after you develop these problems. So measuring people's sleep is important. And post-traumatic stress disorder, we're asking about these sorts of things too, because you remember when I talked about the military using this, a lot of what they were looking at was trauma and how is that related to cognition. And so PTSD is not just experiencing trauma, but some of the symptoms are also related to more common disorders like depression and anxiety. Okay, how does your participation make a difference? So now the way that we do these assessments is we take blood, we do MRI scans, we do this extensive cognitive testing. And those, as I've alluded to a few times, are not going to be helpful to get global information about cognition. So we began collaborating with Ageless, which is your study, so that we could bring in a more diverse population of participants that we can use in conjunction with our participants here in Boston, as well as bringing together the thoughts, perspectives, ideas of the researchers in Malaysia with those of us in Boston, because we have very different life experiences, right? So we come at data differently, and this diversity of researchers themselves is also critical, we believe, to our future understanding. So I'm just going to talk about a few studies. We are very early in our collaboration, very early in being able to look at the data that we have been collecting from your smartphone use. So there's not a whole lot to report on, but I'll tell you about what we have so far. So this is the first study that we worked on in your cohort, and that's trying to understand, can we even do this? Can we deploy these smartphone tasks and have participants do them regularly and do them at home without coming into the lab, where we have a lot more control over what you're doing, as far as being there to remind you and to put it in front of you. So it's an important thing to know. If it doesn't work, if we can't really have reliability in getting this kind of data, that's important. We need to figure out why. So the first pilot study, which means you have just a small study just to see how things are going to play out. We had 5 in-person and 5 remote tasks that we were doing. We recruited about 141 people. And out of all those people, 16.3% completed all 10 tasks. And for one major impact or one major interference that led to this is we had a lot of problems with the smartphone application itself. It was not yet ready it had a lot of bugs. There were a lot of problems downloading it, logging in, crashing, those sorts of things, which we have been working with our developers of this thing to try to improve and to fix a lot of those. And over time, there have been improvements. So those are pretty important advancements in our study, but it's still not perfect yet. We're still working on making a better, more reliable smartphone task. So we changed because we wanted more people to be able to do them. So we changed the number of tasks we were doing and where, and again, we have these improvements to the application. And so then we ran a second pilot study. Does this help? Does it help people to have the capacity to be able to do these tasks? And it did. I mean, we have a long way to go. We're still working out, we're always analyzing and trying to figure out how can we make this the most accessible for our participants to be able to do it. But it works. We went up to 41.5%, completed all assessments, and that's a completion rate of increase of 150%, which is significant. And we think we can get it even better as we make more adaptations. So quickly, let me talk about speech a little bit. Our analysis of speech is looking at lots and lots of different features. And I'm just gonna mention a few of them here, just to kind of give you some idea about what the kinds of things that we're looking for when we collect speech data. So first is pitch. So the way that you use pitch in your normal talking life affects how people understand, or it conveys how you convey meaning. So you might say, you need help versus you need help. And those are conveying very different messages to somebody. Emphasis is also important. So you might say, I really want to go. Or you might say, I really want to go. And so again, how you emphasize words conveys meaning and emotion. So you might say, I didn't get chosen, and be really sad about it. Or you might be, I didn't get chosen, relieved. So again, the way that you actually make sounds in your speech affect meaning and how you communicate. There are also other features that we look at, such as duration, how long do you talk, the rate of speech, do you talk fast, do you talk slow, pauses, how long do you pause, how often do you pause, those sorts of things. And like I said, there are a lot of other acoustic features that we look at. So one of the studies that we did in collaboration between Boston University and your study, Ageless in Malaysia, what we found is that for the acoustic features that we were pulling out of the data, they're similar across different languages. And this is really important because you remember one of our goals is to be able to collect data globally. And as you know, there are lots of languages globally. So, I mean, we don't know if we're going to be able to find the same sort of things with all languages, of course, because we're just starting this again. But we did find that we could between the languages in our two groups. And so we followed this up with another study that is looking at 5 different cohorts and who vary in language, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, meaning how much wealth they have or don't have. And again, we found these acoustic features are similar across all these different languages and races, ethnicities, and socioeconomic status. And this, I'm sorry, I should have said at the beginning, is just the title of the research as we published it. And these are just all the authors. So you don't need to worry about too much about that. But so these 5 cohorts were the Framingham Heart Study, Bogalusa Heart Study, and El Foro in the United States. And then the 2 international cohorts were your study in Malaysia, as well as a study we're doing in collaboration with some investigators in India. This is a lot, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is in our work, we're just starting to learn about speech and cognition, but we are learning and we are finding these relationships between speech and cognition, and that's very, very promising. Okay, so just a few of the early findings from speech tasks in addition to what I've said so far. Some of our research has demonstrated that speech is associated with mild cognitive impairment. So that's like the screen I showed you earlier where we had the person who had normal cognition in 1 year and then mild cognitive impairment later. We also found that one of the most important speech features, at least in one study that we did, that identified whether someone had cognitive impairment or not, was what we called filled pauses. So that's when you're talking, do you say you know, these sounds that people make as they're trying to think about what's the next thing that I'm going to say. And this data here came out of work that we've done at the Framingham Heart Study in Boston University with those samples of speech that are a full hour worth of cognitive testing. But what we found was that we don't need the full hour to find these kinds of features. You only need very short segments. So the same things were identified in 5 minutes of speech, 10 minutes of speech, 20 minutes of speech, which is really important because it means that we can do these kinds of, collect this kind of data much more simply and with much less burden on participants. So we don't need to have them do 10 or 1 hour of cognitive testing, just short little segments like what we're asking you to do on these cognitive, on these digital tasks, you know, tell a little story, answer some questions, 1 minute of animal naming. We're still going to be able to pick up those features, which is exciting. Clock drawing test I talked about a few minutes ago, that's been found to be related to brain measures on MRI scans, as well as other cognitive tasks. We've also found that reaction time tasks, you know, when you're hitting that screen as fast as you can, are related to cardiovascular risks like high cholesterol, heart attack, stroke, and these kinds of risk factors are the same for the brain. What's good for your heart is good for your brain, and vice versa. And then the smartphone performance was also consistent with that traditional, lengthy, burdensome cognitive testing when we have you do lots of different tasks. And so if we can get that same kind of information with a quick, smart, deployable, effective, inexpensive method using a smartphone application, then that's going to allow us to be much broader in our data collection. So I just say here, digital is the new blood, and we believe this kind of like when I was saying earlier that once you do these tasks and we collect that data is with us indefinitely. It's kind of like what happens with blood now. When we collect blood in our research studies and we do analyses on them, we still have those blood samples for decades, 10, 20 years and more at the Framingham Heart Study because we've been going since 1948. So as we learn and develop new ways of analyzing the blood, we can go back to those original samples and deploy these new techniques, these new strategies with all of our new knowledge to be able to pick up even more information. And if we can do that with blood, we can do that with this digital data even better, because the blood is a finite sample. It's going to end at some point. It can't last forever, whereas digital can. So that's just a little bit about our perspective for why we're asking you to do these cognitive tests on the smartphone and why it's really, really essential that we have the kind of information that you're providing for us so that we can better understand globally Alzheimer's disease and how to keep our brains healthy. So at this point, I think we can just move to a questions session. So let me see if I can get back to a screen where I can see you all. Stop sharing. Okay, did I stop sharing?
Yes, you stop your share.
Oh, there you are. I gotcha. All right, wonderful.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Cheryl, for all of the things that you have explained to us about the function of the test and the importance of all the contribution of our participants from Malaysia, especially because the most important things that being highlighted in the beginning is that because there is very few numbers of studies on Alzheimer's disease or dementia have been conducted in Malaysia, thus that makes all of your contribution here is very important. So now we're going to the Q&A session. So before I open it to the screen, you can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat box, which I will read into it later. I think I can start with the one question that I really burning here, because since that just now, Dr. Cheryl, you mentioned about the speech data that have been collected, right? So can you give your opinions, or what do you think about how is the language, the differences of the language might affect the sensitivity of this speech data to be used as a cognitive test, especially now if in Malaysia, English is not our mother tongue language, even though we do speak English, but how this become a factors in terms of sensitivity to use it as a cognitive test?
Sure, that's an excellent question. So, as I said, some of the initial research that we've been doing has actually been comparing what we can pick up in speech across different languages. And we're at the very beginning, right? So we have some language variety in your population, the data we've collected. We have some language variability in the data we've been collecting from the groups in India. Even in the United States, excuse me, one of the cohorts we're working with in the United States is predominantly Spanish speaking, Mexican Spanish speaking. So we have that language as well. So we are finding similar features. This is a very, very small selection of languages, of course, and there are differences in how different languages emphasize words, how they use their voice to be able to communicate information, the kinds of sentence structure that they use, where words go in a sentence, and also sounds. Their languages have different sounds that are produced that some of us who don't speak that language have a hard time even pronouncing. So certainly there are a lot of differences. And so we'll always have to take that into consideration. So what we're looking for is where are the similarities. And in a research project like yours, we're looking at your speech features as well as getting information about your cognitive functioning. So we're going to be able to look at them together within your actual population to see what are those associations between speech features and cognition. Because you're right, it might not be the same everywhere, but we have hope that there's going to be a lot of similarity, and we're going to be able to look at that.
Thank you for the answer. Okay, now I can see there's a few questions in our chat box. Let me go through. Okay. So Mr. Nagaratnam here was asking, like, how long is the study going to last? Okay, maybe I can answer for this.
Great.
Okay, for our study in Malaysia for these Linus Participants apps, we are planning to do for 2 years, which is you need to do the Linus Participant apps for every 3 months for 8 sessions. So in total, it will take about 2 years. Okay. Would you like to add anything, Cheryl?
I think the only thing that I would add, this is true. This is the research that you're doing in Malaysia right now. What I would just add is that if we find really exciting findings, I'm hoping our collaboration won't end. So we seek more funding from people who can provide the money that it takes to run a kind of study like this, and we can keep going and learn more and more and more. So yes, it's only a couple of years for now, but we're hoping that we can continue on with this kind of work with your team.
Yes, that is what we are hoping as well, for further collaboration and more impact in our research. So before I go back to the chat box, let's go to the screen that Mr. Raymond Jaden has raised your hand. So you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. One is, would someone with tremors, for example, essential tremors, would that impact their response to these? The test that we're doing through the handphone? That is one. The second thing is, what about nutrition? Have you all looked into nutrition and cognition also? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, those are great questions. So addressing the first question about tremor, absolutely it can affect how you do on these tasks. And that's another thing that as we develop our research strategies, we're going to make sure to pick those things up. An example of of a disease process, most tremor is not a disease process, but an example of a disease process that causes tremor is Parkinson's disease. And one of the things that goes along with Parkinson's disease is slowness. So necessarily people are going to be slower on these tasks because of the Parkinson's disease. And it doesn't mean that it's a cognitive issue. It's a motor issue, or how you move. So those are really, really important distinctions to make, and things that we are collecting information about so that we can control for them as we look at the data. And then the second part of your question was, what's the second part of your question?
Was on nutrition.
Nutrition, yes, nutrition. So at Framingham, where I work here in Boston, we've been collecting all kinds of health data, lifestyle data, and whatnot from our participants from, since like 1948. So we have a lot of information about diet and nutrition from our participants that we can go back to very early adulthood, even though they might be well advanced in age now, or even deceased at this point. So yes, nutrition is something that we have started to look at the Framingham Heart Study. There is quite a bit of research out there on nutrition and cognition, and it has been determined that nutrition is very important for maintaining brain health. So you want to keep a nutritious diet as you go along. And this starts early in your life. It's not just as you get older that you need good nutrition, but throughout your life, nutrition is very important for protecting brain health.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now we go back to the chat box here. So Mr. George Ernst were asking, if we detect one of us has deteriorated in the reference to the study, will us inform that person and advise treatment? So again, I can answer from my part, and then you can continue from there. Okay, for our own participants, ethically, yes, we do need to inform our participants if we found there is any abnormality, or if there's any issues referring to their test that we are doing for them. So usually here what we do is we will provide a referral letter for our participants, and it need to be referred to, if it's under University of Malaya, usually we refer them to University Malaya Hospital to our UMMC. So yes, we will do that. But if pertaining to this Linus participant apps, that's how Dr. Cheryl shared earlier, that this is still the data that have been collected is the experimental phase, and we're still looking at what we can do with that. So I guess from there you can continue, Dr. Cheryl.
Yes, and that's exactly right. And that's where we are as well. We're trying to figure out what information that we collect from this, from doing these tests has meaning, and how can we share that meaning with participants. So we have the potential to give you that information in real time, meaning as soon as you finish the task, you can find out, how did I do compared to the last time I took these tasks, for example. And so that potential is there, and it's coming. We're just not quite ready to do that yet because, as Nina said, we are still in the experimental stage, and we don't want to alarm people unnecessarily if it really doesn't mean anything, if there are changes over time. So that's where we are with that. Again, stay tuned. I think we're going to get there. But for right now, ethically, we think that we need to just make sure we understand what it is before we share it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Cheryl. So I think that some sort of answering the question from Chief Bernard Chong, Alpani from So LC. So that kind of question about asking about the results, right? So I hope that this gives you some overview about what we are trying to do our best here. And there's one question asking, so far are our response clearly received? As I understand from the developer side or from the technical teams, that we are actively contact with them. If there is any technical issues in terms of the apps, yes, all the data is clearly and being stored in a good way. So thank you so much for that. And also Mr. Nagaratnam also asking about the result we made at the end of the test. Yes, that's what we are hoping to do. About the MRI and blood test, because Dr. Cheryl here, we are also collect their blood, and some of the participants are involved with the MRI study as well. So yes, we do provide individual results. So if you're not yet received your result, you can contact our research assistant and asking about the status of your result. And if it's ready, it is you can collect it in our center. Okay. The PDF version also we can share it through WhatsApp to your number. Okay. So there's no more question here in the chat box. We are now at 10 p.m. But I think I open again for the last question in our screen. If any of you would like to ask, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. If not, maybe we can proceed to take picture. Okay, yeah. Madam Matilda. Yeah, you can unmute.
Yes, Matilda here. I find that the tests are not so similar to what we did. Some of the tests I see. And also I would like to know, because there was one that we had to count backwards, So at one stage I found that I could not remember. I can't remember the last number and I couldn't go forward. So what does it mean? Does it mean that my memory is going? That's very upsetting.
No, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, really. It's hard for all of us to multitask, to do two different things. I assume that you're talking about counting backwards while you're doing the walking and the standing tasks. Yeah. So doing multiple things at one time is hard for everybody. And it's really actually not the way our brains were designed to do lots of different things at the same time. Our brains are most efficient and effective if we just have to concentrate on one thing at a time. So when we're doing that task with you, we're not so concerned about how accurate, I shouldn't say this probably, we're not so concerned about how accurate you are in the numbers that you're providing. But our goal is to make you think about something different than your walking or your balance, your standing. So we're not actually analyzing the numbers that you're saying. It's just a way that we can have you do something that distracts you from what we're really looking at, which is your walking and standing.
One more question is regarding the MRI. I didn't go for the MRI test. Does it affect anything in the studies that you all are doing?
Okay, I can answer that. For MRI study is actually a different part of the study. It's just happened that we recruit our participant from the same group of participants. So you don't worry. It doesn't mean that if you're not being offered to do MRI, that means that you are good or you're bad. It's just that the recruitment of the study pattern. Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. All right.
It is lovely to see your faces. And thank you so much for coming. It's been such a pleasure and a joy to talk with you today. And I mean, if there are any more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, maybe we can just open another one, last one. But if you miss this one, don't worry. You can always WhatsApp to us to the number that actively contact you, or you can email to us. Then we can try to see how we can help with that question. So with that, again, let us thanks to Dr. Cheryl, our collaborator from Boston University, for spending your time with us. And again, what make it happen is to all of your participants who staying until now, so that now you can finally have your sleep. Okay.
Yes, thank you for accommodating me and meeting with me so late at night. I do appreciate that. Okay. And I appreciate all your questions. They've been fantastic. I love that you're thinking about all these things.
All right.